Bro, Paul Pogba is one of those people, right? Everybody's got an opinion. Right, there are a lot of people that play at a very high level for a long time, and not a lot of people end up forming opinions about them. Right? Maybe as they get towards the end of their career, you form more of an opinion about them, not just as a player, but as a person. You're like Sergio Busquets. Do you have a real opinion on Sergio Busquets as a person? Right, like do you? I feel like I don't. I mean, I have immense respect for who he is as a player, and I just assume that he's a quiet, guy. But I feel like I've never seen Sergio Busquets in an interview, and I've never really thought about what he was like as a person or heard anything about him off the field. Until I obviously started doing a podcast with a guy that played with him, and then it's cool to hear about how those guys are behind the scenes. And unsurprisingly, Busquets sounds like a fantastic guy. Paul Pogba is the exact opposite of that, right? Of those players that can be world class for a long time, but you don't form a strong opinion. Other than the fact that they're good and they're able to play at that level, there just isn't there's a star quality. And I'm not saying those guys, I'm talking about media star quality. The hair, knowing where the cameras are, working the media, doing things that stand out, being public with your life, with your escapades, going to fashion shows, being gregarious, being outgoing. Paul Pogba was always that. And when you do that, whether you're David Beckham or any of the other people that seem to have followed in that mold of these massive footballers that become larger than the game itself, to a point that, especially with Paul Pogba, it feels like it obscures how good he really was. Same thing kind of happens with David Beckham. And you're not able to actually get an accurate assessment of the player because the player themselves is not the main attraction. It's the personality. Right, it is the gravity that seems to pull everything else around them into them. But I'm going to try and leave all that off to one side, right? Because I do have a lot of opinions about Paul Pogba. It's hard not to. Everybody will tell you, well, he wasted his talent, or it was this. He didn't want to play, or he didn't show up. Whatever. Leave all that stuff to the side, because in this video, we're going to feel bad for Paul Pogba, because we should feel bad for Paul Pogba, because this shit is crazy. And what it does a very good job of is it pulls the hood back, right? It opens up the hood and you look into the car and you're like, oh, it's not all smooth and shiny, right? Like you get a look into the other side of being a professional footballer. Something I try to talk about a lot, and as more of you guys watch the stuff that I do, the more fortunate that I am to be able to meet these sorts of people and have these sorts of conversations. And I always try to humanize people before I talk about them, at least try and understand where they're coming from. And there is a side to being a professional footballer that this Paul Pogba trial has just, like I was saying, is completely unveiled. So it's his brother, Matthias. He has multiple brothers. Florentine Pogba is somebody that I've signed in Football Manager before, right? There's a whole host of Pogbas. Matthias Pogba was a lower level professional player, but he didn't make it at anywhere the same level of even as Florentine Pogba, who was playing in MLS for a while with Atlanta United. He apparently was a little jaded about a lack of support from Paul Pogba. Because if there's one thing you know about Paul Pogba, it's that, he was the most expensive midfielder or whatever of all time. And there's a lot of money in glitz and glamour in being Paul Pogba. And this is something that happens to a lot of professional athletes, whether you're Pogba or whether you're quiet, right? And Matthias Pogba became involved in a scheme to extort his own brother for money. That's what this trial was. In 2022, Matthias Pogba, who is not the ringleader of this. The way this is described in ESPN, which is just carrying the Associated Press article here, but the AP is going to be, this is accurate, triple fact checked sort of reporting here. The way they describe it is childhood friends of Paul Pogba, and that included Matthias Pogba as well. They kidnapped Paul Pogba with guns and hoods. I don't even know where you're getting a gun in France. Right? I mean, I realize that's like an American sentence, right? But I figured, you would break out the machetes or I don't know. I don't know how it works. I just see the videos of people jousting in Nando's, right? I realize Nando's is not in France. Maybe it is. But if it is in France, I'm assuming they're probably spitting on it or something, just like hitting it with baguettes. Is that an accurate description? Let me know. I have been to Paris 4 or 5 times. I am always intimidated by their level of culture. As somebody that grew up in Florida, it's basically Mars. In anyways, they managed to get guns and hoods, and they like captured him and attempted to. They demanded, right? Is the way it's worded. So it was 6 people, and they demanded 13.6 million US dollars, 13 million euros, from Paul Pogba, and held him at gunpoint. His own brother and childhood friends held him at gunpoint. Money fucks with people, dude. Money and fame and clout. It's like a disease. It really fucks with people. And to the point that you have your own brother and your childhood friends holding you at gunpoint. Matthias Pogba is going to prison for a year. The guy that organized this, who's listed as Rushdan K, I'm guessing it's last name, first initial or something, or maybe that, I don't know. Is Rushdan a first name? Rushdan a first name or last name? The jury is still out. But the jury is not still out on the fact the dude's spending 8 years in prison. Which, you know, that's a big-ass sentence in France. All right. And Matthias Pogba's sentence was 3 years, but 2 years of those were suspended. So he's basically time served and then in house arrest, according to reading further into this article. He's just chilling at his house with an ankle monitor and can't leave. But the fact that this happened, that you have to go through this, like we see all the front-facing stuff with somebody like Paul Pogba in all these other footballers. You see what their PR agencies want us to see. You see their public face. But what is always lost is when sometimes a player goes out on the field and doesn't play well. Maybe it just has to do with the fact that they're a human being going through some crazy shit. And that stuff is amplified. Right? Because I'm a YouTuber. I'm not KSI, right? I am very fortunate to be able to make a good living doing this. I take most of the money and spend it either on making Hidden Grounds episodes or hiring a bunch of editors. We actually have a 7-person staff that helps run like all of our channels. And you guys watching makes that possible. And I still get emails all the time. Like I don't, based off of the number of people that rely on me to pay them and whatever, I don't have a ton of disposable, there's not some mountain of gold bars sitting somewhere because, a Football Manager video got a couple 100,000 views, right? Or a video on this channel pops off and gets 100 or 200,000 views. That's awesome, right? But I don't, I'm not sitting on the people email me and be like, hey, you should buy this club. I'm like, who do you think I am? Who do you think that I am? But what the main email I'm talking about is not those, because those are funny, is people will ask me for money, for help. Legitimately. People that watch the channel or something, they'll email me and they'll tell me sob story after sob story after sob story. And I mean, obviously on the internet, you don't know what's real or fake. So you try not to let it affect you that much. Right? But they'll email you and go, hey, my mom just lost her job. We're about to lose our house. We only need like $500 or else we're going to be living in our car. And you feel like a great guy when we watch the streams, and we really would love if you could do this. I would do whatever I could to thank you. And they're not weird emails. They're not mean emails. And that is magnified 1 billion times if you're Paul Pogba. Because not only are you dealing with that, you're also dealing with family and friends. Right? That's the amount of money that starts to break down the bonds that you've formed as a human being. Because you're not a human being to these people anymore. You're like an ATM. Right? A lot of professional athletes talk about having to deal with those sorts of pressures. And having that sort of pressure placed on you. People just asking for money. Not being able to interact with people when they don't have an angle trying to get something from you. Which I think is why certain professional players flame out in any sport. They struggle to deal with it. They're not able to consistently produce. I mean, how hard is it to be a top-level professional footballer to begin with? Now you're doing that while just going through crazy amounts of mental stress. That you're dealing with these sorts of situations that no normal human being is really necessarily equipped to deal with well. Which brings us back to, gee, you think the reason Paul Pogba hasn't been playing as well the last year or two before he got suspended might have something to do with the fact that he got held at gunpoint and then his brother and childhood friends went on trial for this? Their reason, by the way, which is crazy, right, is they claimed he should have supported them after he became an international star. To which, like, everybody loves the story of, somebody comes out of a bad part of town, they make a ton of money, whether it be, as an artist, as an athlete, as I don't know, they end up running for president or something, right? And then they go back to where they're from and they help, they build a school and they give money to their aunts and their uncles and their grandparents. And that's great, right? But there's a difference between charity and expectation, right? Because Matthias Pogba didn't become the most expensive midfielder in history. Is whatever you think about Paul Pogba, he did become that. And he earned the money that he got. And these people abducted him and held him at gunpoint and threatened his life because they felt like he wasn't supporting them enough after becoming an international star, like they were somehow owed for that. They distorted it in their mind. They'd sat around having a few beers like, yeah, Paul, fuck, man, he's, he wouldn't be where he was if it wasn't for us. Like, let's hold him at gunpoint and see if we can get him to pay him. Can you imagine the feeling of realizing who it was? I don't know if if they were wearing hoods, then I would assume they were trying to obscure the fact it was them. I would assume he maybe recognized the voices but there was a moment where he realized it was his childhood friend, Matthias Pogba. That is a crushing moment, right? And the reason Matthias Pogba became the focus of all this stuff in the first place is he started tweeting. He tweeted that he was going to release damaging information about Pogba, about Mbappe, about their mutual agent. If Paul Pogba didn't give him money, he was trying every angle he could to extort him. And Paul Pogba did start paying these guys. He paid him 100,000 euros, which of course the court is trying to get back for him, as well as damages of something like 50,000 or whatever. Honestly, if you hold me at gunpoint, I feel like I'm suffering emotional damage far in excess of 50,000 euros, because that is just a really traumatic experience to have to deal with before you realize it's your day ones, or at least, the way they make it sound like it's their day ones. The situation is awful, and it shows the dark side of becoming this level of a professional footballer, and that you have to deal with either implicit expectations that you're going to, help out all of these people, and that they're going to come to you and be like, hey, do you want to pay my electric bill this month? You're like, are you a cousin? I don't remember. But this is probably the most extreme example of that you could possibly imagine. But for Pogba, his suspension's been rescinded or whatever. He's able to play from March. So we'll see what happens. He mutually terminated his contract with Juventus, and Paul Pogba will be on the open market in March. And maybe he'll be better. Maybe he'll have some sort of peace of mind now, because the legal battle against his childhood friends and brother over them attempting to extort him is over. Ugh.